Well, folks, this is it. This is our last Sunday for amateurs like myself to stand up here and attempt to preach a message. I'm really looking forward to next Sunday and having Pastor Fisk here to lead us in worship. And by the time I'm done stumbling through this morning, I'm sure all of you will really be looking forward to next Sunday too. But looking back over the past 4 months, our congregation has gained from this interim without a pastor. And so many people have stepped up and have done their part to help. And too many of them for me to even attempt to recognize. And you know who you are. And all of us thank you so much. So we really appreciate that. Now looking ahead to our time coming up with Pastor Fisk, and I hope it will be a long time, what can we expect? Our call team is very impressed with him, and many of you who have met him are also impressed. However, remember he is just a human being like all the rest of us. I have not seen him walk on water or perform other miracles, such as keeping every church member happy all the time. We have to be realistic with our expectations. My wife will tell you I can always throw cold water on any situation. But that's not my intention this morning. My intention is to keep us in reality. I know we have high expectations for our new pastor, and we want to make them, well, I know we'll be happy if we have realistic expectations. While I was working on the call team, I mentioned to some of the team members about a book that I had read over the winter. And this is it. It's my kind of book. It's not very thick. And it's short chapters, easy to get through. And it's written by a couple of fellows. One of them, his name is H.B. London. He's on staff with Focus on the Family. And one of the things that he does is he counsels with pastors who are going through difficult situations. And so he's heard probably every story you could imagine about what life is like as a pastor, and he himself has been a pastor. So it was a good book for me to read because I've never been a pastor. I've never been married to a pastor. I've never been a pastor's kid. I had no idea what life is like on this side of the pulpit and beyond, in their homes and such. So it was really good for me to read, and I'd recommend, anyone who's interested. It's going to be in our church library. It was in our church library until I'm such a slow reader. I had it for a long time. So anyway, I gained a lot of perspective about things that I had never really thought much about. Many of us have occupations where our job is totally separate from our personal life. Our job performance evaluation doesn't depend on how our kids behave at church. It doesn't depend on what our spouse does with their free time. In fact, a lot of our jobs, our evaluation doesn't even depend upon what we do with our own free time. But with a pastor, it's different. They're always being evaluated because they're a spiritual leader. And so what we see them do throughout their life, whether it's in here in the church or whether it's outside, we have a tendency to constantly want to evaluate that. And I realize that all of us as Christian witnesses should live exemplary lives, but it always seems easier to forgive a layperson for their mistakes that we make. Pastors, on the other hand, should be perfect always. And some of this demand for perfection comes from the scriptures themselves. And Paul in 1 Timothy, I'm going to read this to you. 1 Timothy chapter 3, beginning with verse 2, writes about the duties of a pastor. In this one, they use the term overseer. And I'll start with verse 2. An overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, uncontentious, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And not a new convert, lest he become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he may not fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Deacons likewise must be men of dignity, not double-tongued or addicted to much wine or fond of sordid gain, but holding to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. And let these also first be tested, then let them serve as deacons if they are beyond reproach. That sounds pretty demanding to me. However, if you think about it, if every first century pastor were perfect, do you think Paul would have needed to write down these guidelines? Apparently not every first century pastor was perfect. You know, it was expensive and took a lot of time to write these letters and to transmit them. And, you know, they didn't have the type of mail service we have to send letters. They didn't have email and all that. So if there was such a need for Paul to write to tell what pastors should be like, there must have been some problems already. And so can we expect any different today? And then, of course, there's Peter, who you might say was the first century pastor of pastors. He was the one that Jesus had chosen specifically. And I'm going to read just a little bit from Matthew chapter 18, starting with verse 21. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Now, someplace I read where when they use the term 70 times 7, that's kind of shorthand for infinity. It's unmeasurable almost. So we always should forgive. Have you ever thought that maybe Peter was asking the question in reverse? In other words, was Peter actually checking to see how many times he could screw up and still be forgiven? You know, he says, if my brother sins against me, how many times I forgive? Well, you know, if I put myself in his place, I'm not going to go to Jesus and say, how many times can I sin and be forgiven? I'll put my brother there, you know. So, and I'm sure Peter was, Peter was like us in a lot of ways. And it isn't too much later that Peter himself denies that he even knows Jesus. You have to wonder, did Jesus choose someone like Peter so that we would know that we even need to forgive our leaders and that they would fail and need forgiveness from us so that we can move forward? In fact, if I were to summarize this book, and I'm sure some of you hope I summarize it real shortly, and if I were to do it in just a few words, it would be forgive your pastor and pray for him. Last Sunday, Marcia's message was about praying for Word of Life Church. A big part of that will be praying for the pastor and his family. And in this book, there's a number of chapters that describe different ways that we can support our pastor. One chapter is titled 49 Ways to Show Love to Your Pastor. Now, I went through the 49, and some of them are a little corny, But there's some interesting ideas on ways that are inexpensive. I like that term. But also things that aren't too difficult to do that would just be little ways to show your love and support for the pastor. Another chapter is entitled, What Pastors Wish Congregations Knew About Ministry. And I want to read just a little bit about an excerpt out of that. I know it's boring to have people read to you, but anyway, this is the chapter is entitled, What Pastors Wish Congregations Knew About Ministry. And the subtitle in this section is called, Ministry and Marriage Are Always Tied Together. For most of this century, congregations assumed when they called a pastor, they would have two people for the price of one, getting the spouse for free. At the same time, pastors and spouses have believed marriage and ministry are inevitably in rivalry. To make pastoral relationships more realistic and rewarding, both notions need to be overhauled. So there has to be a little give both ways. And it has some list about 10 things here that would be good to maybe even have the congregational council or whatever talk over with the pastor, and just so that there's understanding. 1, don't expect perfection of the pastor's family. Families are unique. This is number 2. Families are unique and should not be expected to be like any other family. That goes for all of us. Every family is unique. Number 3, a pastor should be encouraged to give time, effort, and energy to lifelong development of his marriage and family. Every pastor functions better when things are going well at home. Number 4, should your pastor be a workaholic? And there's a possibility that we might be getting a pastor who is maybe a little bit of workaholic, so we'll need to be wary of that. Encourage him to set weekly time blocks for marriage and family. Number 5, resist words like, our former pastor's family did it differently than you do. Number 6, befriend the pastor's family with the same warmth you show other new people or old friends in your church. Number 7, the pastor's family needs a surrogate extended family. You know, his extended family lives a long ways away from here, and so may need aunts, uncles, and surrogate grandparents. Number 8, don't expect the pastor's spouse or children to play the piano or head a highly visible ministry. And these two, the last two are probably really important. Number 9, expect the family to grieve over leaving their last church. The process can't be rushed. And number 10, offer them massive affection and affirmation. And so that's just one little excerpt from this book. And like I said, I could bore you all day long going through all of this, but I would encourage any of you to take the opportunity to pick it up and to read it. And like I said in our summary, I think it's going to be really important that we be willing to forgive any mistakes that our new pastor might make. I don't expect any, but but again, we have to be realistic that he's going to be, you know, with a group like this, there's bound to be times where he might say something that maybe he didn't intend to offend, but maybe we take just the wrong way, or anything like that. So in conclusion, I again be willing to forgive and be ready to pray. Thank you.